Hey, welcome! In this explainer, we're diving into a topic that comes up a lot, the rules around women's travel in Islam. We're going to break down the perspective of one specific scholarly source to really understand its core arguments and reasoning.
So let's get right to it. The big question is, can a woman travel alone in Islam? Let's unpack the answer that this particular text gives us.
All right, first things first, what's the main takeaway here? Let's look at the core ruling as it's presented.
Okay, so the source is super clear on this point. It states that, according to the dominant scholarly view, it's not permissible for a woman to travel without what's called a mahram. Now, this word mahram is really the key here. It means a male guardian, and we're going to see it pop up again and again.
You might be wondering, okay, where does this come from? Well, this ruling isn't just pulled out of thin air. It's grounded in the foundational sources of Islamic law. The Quran, which is the sacred text, the Sunnah, which are the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad, and what's known as scholarly consensus.
All right, so we've got the what. But what about the why? Why does this rule even exist? Well, according to this source, the whole reason for it boils down to just one word: protection.
And this is a really important distinction the source makes. The idea isn't to restrict, but to protect. And thinking about it from that angle, well, that's key to understanding the logic behind the whole thing.
So, what does that really mean, protection? It's about a few key things. The goal is to safeguard her dignity and modesty, to make sure she's safe from any potential harm, and really to help her avoid any kind of difficult or awkward situations that might come up when she's on a journey. Okay, so just how far does this rule go? Let's take a look at its scope, because it's pretty wide. What's really fascinating here is that this isn't about miles or kilometers. There's no 50-mile rule or anything like that. Instead, it's all about the idea of travel. If a journey is something you'd normally call travel, then the rule kicks in. It's based on the principle of the thing, not a specific distance.
And the rule is broad in another way too. It doesn't matter why you're traveling. It could be for something deeply spiritual, like the Hajj pilgrimage, or for visiting family, going to school, or even for work. The requirement for a mahram stays the same across the board. So, this brings us right back to that word we talked about earlier, the mahram. Who exactly is a mahram, and what's their job in all this?
Well, the source defines a mahram as a male relative who is there to provide that protection and support we've been talking about. Essentially, they take on the responsibility for her well-being during the trip. It all ties back to that core idea of safeguarding her. All right, so that's the general rule, but you're probably thinking, are there any exceptions, any nuances to this? And yeah, the source does cover that.
But the text is really clear on this point. While scholars do talk about some exceptions, they are not a general permission slip. They're treated as incredibly rare and are only for very specific situations.
So think of it this way. On one hand, you have the general rule. You need a mahram to travel. And on the other hand, you have this super narrow exception, which is for cases of genuine, urgent need. We're talking about situations where there's a real fear for your life and there is absolutely no other option available.
A great example of this kind of nuance comes up with the Hajj pilgrimage. Let's say a woman can't find a mahram to travel with. In that case, the obligation to perform Hajj is actually lifted for her, and she's not considered to be doing anything wrong. This all goes back to a core principle in Islam, that God doesn't ask a soul to do more than it's capable of.
So in the end, the source really brings it all together. It frames this whole ruling not as a set of restrictions, but as a complete system that's built on the ideas of mercy, wisdom, and above all, protection. And that leaves us with a really interesting question to think about. This framework is all built around the idea of safety and protection. So the big question for today is this. In our modern world, with all its new forms of transportation and communication, how do principles of protection and tradition get interpreted? It's a fascinating place where timeless rules meet a constantly changing reality.